The morning my flag was banned, I realized something strange about power. It rarely announces itself loudly. Instead, it arrives quietly with a polite smile and a letter slipped under your door. I found that letter when I stepped outside to grab my mail. The envelope carried the familiar logo of the Homeowners Association. Living here meant occasional reminders about lawn height or trash bins. Expected something ordinary, but when I opened it, the message inside made my stomach tighten. It stated that the flag hanging on my porch violated community guidelines and must be removed immediately. If I failed to comply within 24 hours, I would face fines. I looked up at the flag moving gently in the breeze. It wasn't offensive. It wasn't political. It wasn't even large. It was simply a small flag representing something important to me, something personal. For 3 years it had hung there without a single complaint. Until now. Later that afternoon, I walked to the community office. The president of the association, Karen Whitmore, sat behind a perfectly organized desk. She didn't look angry. In fact, she looked pleased. "I received your letter," I said calmly. She nodded. "Yes. The board voted this morning. Your flag violates aesthetic standards." "Aesthetic standards?" I repeated. She folded her hands like a teacher addressing a child. "Our community values uniformity. Decorative items that stand out too much can disrupt the visual harmony." I almost laughed. A flag the size of a dinner plate was disrupting harmony? "So you're saying I have to take it down?" I said. "Yes," she replied. "By tomorrow." I walked home slowly, replaying the conversation in my mind. Part of me wanted to remove the flag and forget the entire situation. Life was easier that way, but another part of me kept asking a simple question. Why now? That evening I checked the HOA rulebook. I read every line about decorations, displays, and property appearance, and something interesting stood out. The rules banned flags attached to homes, but they never said anything about flags flown somewhere else. That tiny loophole sat there quietly, waiting. An idea began forming in my mind, an idea so ridiculous I laughed out loud when it first appeared. If they didn't want my flag on my porch, fine. I wouldn't put it on my house. I would put it somewhere they could see it from the entire neighborhood. Somewhere higher, much higher. And as I looked toward the tall communications tower standing just outside the neighborhood fence, a slow smile spread across my face. Karen Whitmore wanted the flag gone. Instead, she was about to see it from everywhere. But she had no idea what was coming next. The idea sounded ridiculous at first. Even as it formed in my mind, I kept asking myself if I had finally lost my patience along with my common sense. But the more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. Karen Whitmore wanted my flag gone from my house. The rulebook clearly said flags attached to homes were not allowed unless they were part of an approved list, but the rulebook never mentioned anything about where a flag could exist outside the property. It was a strange gap in their otherwise obsessive list of regulations, and that gap was exactly what I needed. That evening I walked along the back fence of the neighborhood. Beyond it stood the old communications tower. It wasn't part of the HOA property. It belonged to the city utility company and had been there for decades, long before the neighborhood existed. Tall, steel, impossible to miss. Anyone driving through the neighborhood could see the top of it rising above the rooftops. If something were hanging from that tower, the entire community would notice. I stood there staring at it for several minutes while the sun dipped lower in the sky. The idea wasn't just possible, it was perfect. Of course, climbing a tower wasn't exactly a normal solution to a homeowners association dispute. But the tower had a maintenance ladder running along one side, protected by a safety cage. Workers used it all the time. And technically, I wasn't trespassing. The tower stood on public land just outside the HOA boundary. That night, I prepared carefully. I bought a stronger version of my flag, one that could handle wind at higher altitudes. I added a durable rope and a metal clip designed for outdoor use. Everything needed to survive weather and attention. By the time midnight approached, the neighborhood was silent. Porch lights flickered here and there, but most houses were dark. Perfect timing. I carried the folded flag in a backpack and walked quietly down the sidewalk toward the fence. The tower loomed ahead like a The next morning began quietly, just like any other day in the neighborhood. Birds chirped. Sprinklers clicked on. Garage doors rumbled open as people prepared for work. For a few peaceful minutes, everything felt normal. Then someone looked up. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when my phone buzzed. A message from my neighbor Tom popped up. "Did you see the tower?" I walked to the window and glanced toward the back of the neighborhood. Even from my yard, I could see it clearly. High above the rooftops, my flag moved boldly in the morning wind. The sunlight caught the fabric, making the colors glow against the bright blue sky. It was impossible to miss. Another message arrived. Then another. Within minutes, the neighborhood group chat exploded with notifications. Where did that come from? Is that a flag on the tower? Who did that? I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the reactions unfold. By the time I stepped outside, people were already standing in their driveways pointing toward the sky. Tom walked across the street, shaking his head with a grin. "Please tell me that's not yours," he said. I shrugged casually. "Depends who's asking." He laughed. "Karen is going to lose her mind." As if summoned by the comment, a white SUV pulled quickly around the corner. Karen Whitmore stepped out before the engine had even stopped. Her eyes immediately locked onto the tower. The flag snapped loudly in the wind above us. For a moment, she simply stared. Then she turned toward the small group of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. "Does anyone know who did this?" she demanded. No one answered. I leaned casually against my mailbox, enjoying the morning sunlight. Karen pulled out her phone and started making calls. Her voice grew louder with each sentence. "Yes, there is a flag attached to the communications tower behind the neighborhood," she said sharply. "It needs to be removed immediately." She paced the sidewalk while talking, occasionally glaring toward the sky. The problem was obvious. By midday, the neighborhood had transformed into a live commentary on my little tower experiment. After several minutes, she ended the call just to stare up toward me. A few even stopped on the sidewalk to take photos, she asked. The flag had become the most interesting thing our quiet community had seen in years, I said slowly. Karen Whitmore, however, was not amused. The rules said I couldn't have a flag on my house. Around noon, another message appeared in the HOA group chat. "That doesn't mean you can put one on a tower." This one came directly from her. "Actually," I replied calmly, residents. The unauthorized object attached to the communications tower behind the neighborhood is currently under investigation. Appropriate action will be taken." People immediately started replying. "What object? You mean the flag? Looks pretty authorized by gravity and wind to me." Tom sent me a screenshot of the conversation with a laughing emoji. Meanwhile, Karen had moved beyond the group chat. She called the city utility office that owned the tower. She called the maintenance contractor. She even contacted local code enforcement, but every conversation ended the same way. No one considered the flag a serious issue. One city worker reportedly told her, "Ma'am, we deal with power outages and broken equipment. A small flag isn't exactly an emergency." That response did not improve her mood. Later that afternoon, she knocked on my door. Hard. When I opened it, she stood there holding a printed copy of the HOA rulebook like a weapon. "You need to remove that flag," she said firmly. "I would," I replied calmly, "but it's not on my property." "That doesn't matter," she insisted. "You clearly placed it there to challenge the board." "Well," I said, "the board challenged my porch first." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind outside snapped the flag again, loud enough to hear from the doorway. Karen turned toward the sound and then back to me. "You think this is funny?" she said. "I think it's fair," I answered. She opened the rulebook and flipped through the pages quickly. "We can fine you," she said, "for disruptive behavior." "Is there a rule about towers?" I asked. She stopped flipping. Silence hung between us because she knew the answer. "No," she admitted reluctantly. I nodded. "Then I guess we're both following the rules." Karen closed the book slowly. Her expression shifted from anger to something colder. "This isn't over," she said. "I didn't think it was," I replied. She turned and walked down the driveway without another word. That evening, the flag continued flying above the neighborhood like a quiet victory banner. Kids pointed at it while riding their bikes. A few neighbors even waved when they saw me. But Karen Whitmore was already planning something new. And the next morning I would discover just how determined she was to take that flag down. The next morning I stepped outside expecting the usual calm routine. Instead, I saw a truck parked near the back fence. 2 city workers stood beside it, looking up at the communications tower. One of them held a clipboard while the other pointed toward the ladder. My first thought was simple. Karen had finally found someone willing to remove the flag. Word spread quickly. Within minutes, several neighbors gathered along the sidewalk again, watching the situation unfold. Karen Whitmore arrived shortly after, stepping out of her SUV with the determined expression of someone who believed victory was finally within reach. She walked straight toward the workers. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "That flag needs to come down immediately." One of the workers looked at her, then at the clipboard. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we're not here to remove the flag." Karen blinked in confusion. "Then why are you here?" The worker glanced up at the tower again. "We received several calls this morning," he explained. "People reported the tower needed inspection because something had been attached to it." Karen folded her arms. "Exactly. The flag." The second worker shook his head slightly. "We inspected it," he said. "Turns out the attachment is secure and not interfering with equipment." Karen stared at him as if she hadn't heard correctly. "So remove it," she said. The worker shrugged. "It's not our property concern unless it's dangerous. Right now it's just a flag." A few neighbors behind her tried to hide their smiles. Karen's frustration was almost visible in the air around her. "But it's causing a disruption in the neighborhood," she insisted. The first worker chuckled lightly. "Ma'am, from what we've seen, it's mostly causing people to look up." That line triggered quiet laughter from several people standing nearby. Karen turned toward the group, clearly realizing she was losing control of the situation. Finally, she looked at me. "This is ridiculous," she said. I stepped forward slightly. "Maybe," I replied, "but it's also following the rules." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped, because once again the rulebook had nothing to say. Above us, the wind caught the fabric, and the flag snapped proudly against the bright sky. From nearly every street in the neighborhood, it could be seen waving above the rooftops. After a long moment, Karen shook her head and walked back toward her SUV without another word. The crowd slowly dispersed. Tom clapped me on the shoulder and laughed. "Well," he said, looking up at the tower, "I guess the whole neighborhood has a new landmark now." I followed his gaze toward the sky. Karen Whitmore banned my flag from my house, so I flew it from a tower, and somehow that made it impossible for anyone to ignore.